Test, test, 1, 2. Aha, I think my audio is working now. Sorry about that. I was doing some very deep opining on gluing buttons and switches. nothing, nothing useful. Hey Nick, thanks for coming and letting me know my audio wasn't working. Looks like it's good now. Now people can hear my deep thoughts on glues, buttons, tactile switches. Um, So if anybody wants to come chat, the Google Meet link is at the bottom of the screen. You can type it into your browser, and I will put you up on the screen over here. Oops. This would be a really good job for a 10-year-old. I've often wondered how many buttons I can glue with one single tube of cyanoacrylate. They make big bottles, which I think are cheaper per ounce, but also I wind up getting it all over me and ruining the tips of those bottles before I ever finish them. So I prefer this small tube method. Nick says a 10-year-old might glue themselves to the table in half an hour. Some emoji shape. Yeah, that is true. I have to find a careful 10-year-old. The thing is I might glue myself to the table in half an hour. We will see. I'm trying to be careful here. I had one one close call with the glue so far in about 10 minutes. Yeah, I should have some acetone on hand for this gig here, just in case, in case of emergency. See if we can. Oop, almost glued my fingers together there. See if we can hear this button click. Ooh, Nick, enjoy the snow. Get off your computer. Get some fresh air. I considered using Cherry MX or other tactile keyboard switches for this project, but kind of thought it was overkill for a project that needed 4 buttons, and then I saw some other projects are actually using them. I usually have a friend who is importing a Cherry MX competitor for mechanical keyboards. Maybe I will buy some switches from him for the next prototype. Make things seem real 1980s. Certainly the savings of using cheaper switches is a little balanced out by having to glue button heads on all of them. I once came very close to buying about 20 tractor-trailer trucks full of buttons and beads from a warehouse in Los Angeles. I'm glad I did not. It would have cost $70,000 to move to my warehouse at the time. I don't know that I ever would have made that money back on buttons. Maybe I could have found a shirt button. It was a good tactile button eventually. Out of this tube and maybe 50 buttons in, although I had used this tube to do at least 100 buttons the other day. I'm not exactly sure when I started it. Should count, finally find out how many buttons you can get in one whole tube of super glue. I bet it's something like 200 buttons. We will find out. I will segregate the buttons when I switch tubes of glue. We can find the per mongoose cost of super glue in tactile buttons. I think that's actually the only place I use super glue. I do use a little thread locker to hold the control board nuts from coming out, but that's not totally necessary. Probably good for international shipping. Okay, So, let's see. For a new tube of glue. Uh, Maybe I will start on a different color. Put these blue buttons aside so I can count. We do red, yellow, or green buttons now. You decide! What button color should I... Let's do green! The fans say... Okay. You go to green so I can put these blue ones away later when they dry. Oh, you can't see my stacks of buttons on this camera. That's okay. That's also not interesting. 100 green buttons and 6mm by 6mm by 12mm tactile buttons. There we go. How many buttons does it take to get to the bottom of a super glue tube? A 1. Two. Three. A 3. I have 100 buttons in this pile. I hope it gets through at least this pile. We'll have a lot of tubes of super glue. Really just needed to get through 50 to be uninterrupted doing this today, to go buy more button or glue rather. Have enough buttons, I believe. One thing about doing these things in batches is you get to look at a couple hundred parts that should be identical in a row. It's a good time to do a little QC and see that once in a while you have a button it's not quite up to spec. There's actually a few of these green buttons that I don't like. I'm going to write a white paper called Homogeneity in Button Caps in Additive Manufacturing. Try and get it published in a serious paper. I'm sure that people have written lots of electrical and mechanical engineering papers on the theory and design of tactile buttons. Maybe even like an industrial design on button caps. I did not go that far into my research. The semicircular plano-concave button cap feels by far the best to the user. A lot of rejects in the greens, not a single reject in the blues. The green printer had a corner that was off. It's fine. Only 50% of these buttons need to be good. I'm just going to sort these right now because it seems like there's a lot of bad buttons in this batch. Put up a job posting for a button cap QC checker. Good buttons. And I should have a tray for doing this. It's a bad button. A lot of imperfect green buttons. I'm getting there. Maybe 25% of that batch not up to spec. Fine, I made plenty of buttons. All right. These in my garbage pile. Get back to gluing. The important work of gluing. Often I will start something like this thinking, I'm just going to get this thing done early in the morning. And then it's like lunchtime, and I'm still gluing something. I spent the last 2 straight days gluing a wholesale order for somebody else. Watched 2.5 seasons of Stargate Atlantis. It was something. I glued from 7 in the morning until 9 at night, both days. It was a real festival of glue. Oh, Chris Robertson stopped in to say hi. Hey, Chris, how you doing? Yes, I am still doing sub-assembly assembly. I was getting close to assembling full mongooses, but ran out of solder of the appropriate diameter, and so there's no lack of things that I can do. I am doing sub-assembly now for future batches of mongooses, so those will come out a little quicker. I've already done this for batch 1, but uh, do not have the correct solder to actually attach them to the board without bridging everything, but I will later today. Thank you, Amazon. I have been working on designing a clock in my very short little bit of spare time before I go to bed. Sketching in bed, gear trains and escapement mechanisms. I think I might build a clock next week. Take a day off to do that, but I don't want to get too down a wormhole of new prototyping. Crazy thing is, it's such an advanced and yet simple thing. You know, any cleverness of a clock was invented hundreds of years before I was born. I'm not going to add much to it other than what materials. Yeah, mechanical clock. I've been thinking about building a pendulum clock, primarily out of laser cut stuff. They sell some really cheap laser cut wooden clocks, but they're very kind of steampunk rococo, which is a style. But they don't really work very well. They sort of rely on you sanding all of the pivots, kind of like the Bronco pan, actually, which is clever. But I'm kind of thinking of using acrylic for a lot of the gear faces that need to be hard, and like the pallet forks and such, um, that would not require as much sanding or lubrication. Maybe even some Delrin in there, although Delrin's a little softer. It's nice and slippery, but um, the clock is just going to use something like 20 608 bearings, which, if you ever skated, that's the same bearing as in your rollerblades or skateboard roller skates. They're very cheap. There's actually one of those bearings in each one of the mongoose, and I have a couple of prototypes that use like 16 of them, so I have hundreds of 608 bearings around. Um, and I would use a bunch of M8 hardware. I don't know if it'll be a fun product because it'll be so much more expensive than the wood ones. Like, they're selling the wood ones for less than I could buy the acrylic for wholesale. It's just so much fancier, but I think, um, yeah, I think people would dig it, and it would actually keep good time if I am right about reducing friction by using ball bearings on a large clock. Have I seen ClickSpring's large clock? No, I have not. Chris, send me a link, or you can go back to work too. um, I've seen a bunch of sort of laser cut mechanical clock prototypes. I've seen some 3D printed clocks. A friend of mine asked if I could 3D print him a tourbillon clock. I think I'm saying that right. Gotten it wrong a couple of times. I said, yes, I could do that. However, that is a $5,000 project. It's going to take weeks of work. Um, yeah, I've seen people like print mainsprings and regulators out of uh, PLA, which is kind of crazy, but everybody's PLA is a little different, and trying to figure out the spring constant of the thing and sand it to the right thickness seems crazy. Um, I was just going to use a pendulum and a weight. I learned something interesting about pendulum clocks the other day. A couple of interesting things, actually. It's been a real great Wikipedia wormhole to go down. Is that a pendulum clock is affected by local gravity, and up here at a mile above sea level, my clock might lose 16 seconds a day versus if it had the same pendulum length at sea level, because I have a little bit less gravity up here in the mountains or in the high desert, um, which means you have to make an adjustable length pendulum. It's a pretty simple thing with one bolt and one nut, but yeah, adjusting a pendulum clock is sort of interesting. I think I was sort of going for the simplest clock, right, as minimalist as possible, without any sort of like tubular shaft assembly for a single clock face. I was going to have it read out kind of like a digital clock, where there are different wheels that display hours, minutes, and seconds. But I was going to leave everything exposed so you could kind of see the inner workings without like adding Rococo or steampunk design to any of those things. Just try and make it as completely Bauhaus as possible. Um, I did one design and I just like a sketch on paper, and then I got out my calculator and I started figuring out the reduction ratios. Then I got out my caliper and kind of estimated the smallest gear that I could make on a laser cutter that would still be, sturdy and smooth. And I realized that, if the minimum gear size was, let's say, 2 or 3 inches in diameter, then I would have to have some pretty big clock faces, which would add a lot of angular momentum to the system and just make the clock physically huge, which I did not love. So I added some intermediary step down and transfer gears between the hour or the minute gear and the second and hour gears. And I think it should work. They'll have, I want to say, 5 gear sets, um, each one having 2 gears affixed on a shaft and then sitting in some rollerblade bearings. Should be a pretty fun project, but I just don't want to get months down it. I want it to be like, you know, a week's worth of half hours worth of drawing in bed, and then one day of drafting and half a day of assembly. That's about what I'm willing to put into Galileo's life's work at the moment, at least. It, led me to research all sorts of uh, things about mechanical clocks and inventions for different types of escapements. I learned all about the grasshopper escapement, um, some curved pallet forks that kind of took over in the 1700s, which I will probably use that style of pallet fork geometry. Um, it also occurred to me that, you can have a half or third second pendulum and escapement wheel, which then drives a 1 second second hand. But I think as the clock gets smaller and smaller, higher precision is required to maintain time. So I'm going to go with like a almost 1 meter, 1 second pendulum to start with. I think that seems fun. Anyway, I'm sure everybody was just tuning in to hear about gluing buttons and is wildly angry that we're talking about mechanical clocks. But if anybody wants to come talk about mechanical clocks, the link is down here. You can come on the stream. Let's talk Huygens. I don't know if I'm even saying that name right. I learned that the first person documented to have recorded the idea for a pendulum clock was Galileo, but by that time he was old and blind and had to have his son make a sketch, and he described it. Um, Pretty amazing to me. I assume that somebody has built that design, but Galileo never built it, and then it was another, I don't know, 100 or 200 years, something like that, before somebody actually built a working pendulum clock, which I believe was Huygens. Chris says, clocks and watches are fascinating. I went down the YouTube rabbit hole watching watchmakers rebuild classic watches. Crazy how small they could make gears 2,200 years ago. Yeah, it's really, like I got interested in horology while taking camera shutters apart. There's a lot very, very similar in taking from the horological world there. Um, I actually found a Twitch channel where a guy he's like a uh, watch repairman. He takes apart watches live, and you can see what he's doing. I also have watched some cut videos on YouTube about it. It's very interesting. Um, I am not a watch guy. I think, I have an iPhone and I'm in front of a computer. I need not wear a bracelet all day. However, uh, fascinating how they work. I considered buying a few AliExpress mechanical self-winding watches just for the purpose of disassembling them on video, seeing if I can get them back together, but another time and another place, I guess. I did come across this sort of scam while looking for a watch to disassemble on AliExpress about a year ago, where there's this watch. It's like a mechanical watch that they sell on AliExpress for like $20. And then there was this design company in LA selling that watch as a box of parts that you could put together yourself for like $85. Designed in Los Angeles. No, it wasn't. It was really funny. They put like a lot of money into a commercial and sold like a couple $100,000 worth of watches at 4 times the assembled price. And I'm sure they were getting them for half of that as just buckets of parts from China. It was cool. Good, good marketing scam. I think the interesting thing about watches is or clocks in general, the principle behind how everything works is always extremely simple. But the manufacturing techniques are extremely hard. It could take a lifetime to sort of master cutting gears that small that are still smooth and precise and accurate. Um, yeah, I wonder if they've ever made uh, camera shutter escapements with jeweled movements. Seems a little unnecessary. They probably just use like tungsten carbide, but I bet somebody has done it. Excuse me. Glue's starting to get to my eyes. I don't know if anybody has ever built a clock that utilized roller skate and roller blade or skateboard bearings in it before. Probably like a little less nice than a jeweled movement. I was thinking about hanging a can of paint from mine as the drive weight, so kind of a lot of force being applied to the escapement wheel. Chris Robertson off to work. Hey, nice chatting. Come back and talk about clocks sometime. Have fun designing very high stakes plumbing. The post office is going to open in half an hour. Maybe then I will go drop off this order. Till then, let's do some more button gluing. Looks like I'm easily going to get 100 buttons out of a tube of glue. That's pretty good. I think a tube of glue is like, I don't know, somewhere between 25 and 50 cents. Half a penny worth of glue at most in each thing, but I think it's probably closer to a tenth of a penny. I don't remember if 4 tubes of glue is $1 or $2. We have not come near the end yet, I think. Stay tuned for the economics of cyanoacrylate. You ever wonder how they make glue? Would it not just stick to everything? I wonder if they make it in some sort of gas shielded reactor. I believe it requires oxygen for Ca glue to cure effectively. Maybe they do it under nitrogen or something. I have no idea about what chemical reaction is going on in the gluing process. Uh-oh. Starting to get glue on my fingers. It's the beginning of the end. The last time I did this, I had like kind of hard scales glued to my finger for a day or two. Not to glue my headphone cord to the table. Not too much glue in that one. Okay, let's see if we can salvage this. Oh yeah, definitely. Oh. Ugh. Well. Need 5 more button caps. That's a good one. Great button. 3. My fingers are starting to be covered in cyanoacrylate. I am losing a lot of touch feeling in them, which leads to getting more glue on my fingers as I am less able to hold the buttons effectively in my right hand. It hasn't gotten out of control, but I may have to stop at some point today. Okay. So I've done 100 buttons with this tube of glue. I don't should have weighed it. I don't really have a precise enough scale, but that seems like a good yield for buttons. I'm gonna put the blue ones away so far. Try another 100 in red or yellow. Oh man, got glue all over the table. Ugh. Trying to keep them separated, make the assembly a little easier when I go to solder. I think the blue ones should all be dry by now. Is that true? Oh no, they are not. Okay. All right, I'm going to step away for a minute, try and wash this off my hands, and then we'll try and do another 100 buttons. Next up, red. Be right back. Okay, and now for the exciting continuation. Gluing red buttons. Wonder what percentage of glue gets on my desk. I'm glad I put down this careful paper. Trying to get all the glue on my pants rather than my shirt. Why that is, I guess, is a long story. I have, I think, 300 pairs of identical pants and only one shirt from my second worst business decision of all time. So, this email. What did they say? Okay. We'll glue in. Uh-oh. uh, wait for the exciting conclusion. Will it glue 200 buttons in one tube? Or not? You'll have to wait to find out. Tune in next time. I think if I can manage to do this without lifting my elbows off the table, I'm slightly more efficient. I bet this was somebody's job, like day in and day out for 8 hours a day in the 60s. Was gluing buttons on Whirlpool washing machines. Next time I have to do something like this, I think I'm going to try and make a contest out of it. Don't be surprised if I am the organizer of the world speed button gluing contest. That'd be something if I could convince people to come from all over the world to Albuquerque, New Mexico to glue buttons in a 1 day event. It's getting a little empty. If I had 3 hands, I think I could do this intensely faster. Wouldn't have to pick up and put down the glue tube. Save me half of the time. That button has glue on it. Booby trap. Paper on my desk is not entirely flat, which makes standing buttons on their heads a little more difficult. And an inefficiency in the process. Add that to my white paper. I may get 200 buttons out of this tube of glue yet. I was building the mongoose, or ordering the parts and charging for it. I tried to cost out absolutely everything down to the nut and screw and glue count. I could not have figured out that there's 1 penny worth of glue in every mongoose, but I did try and estimate it. It wound up being a couple dollars worth of miscellaneous things like glue and solvent and thread locker in every mongoose, masking tape. I even tried to figure out like how much sandpaper goes into every mongoose. Not that it ships with the device, but it uses a certain amount of sandpaper to finish each one. It's always kind of a fun guessing game. What does this thing cost? Definitely put a few $100 worth of time into gluing these things. It's my like second or third round of gluing. Soon though. Never have to do this again, I think. Making plenty of buttons. At least for another estimated year's worth of sales. The more I think about it, the more I think that next year I really should run a speed button gluing championships at the makerspace. Get this job done in 20 minutes. All I need is like 10 competitors. My eyes getting itchy. I'm starting to worry about gluing my eyeball shut. Kind of an acrid thing. Makes my eyes burn a little bit, even with this just one tube of glue. Maybe we're getting to the end. Found a random resistor packaged with my buttons. I guess they came out of the same warehouse or the same factory. Or maybe it's a diode. Definitely not one of mine. It says D071N40. MC. Don't know what that is. Yeah, we're coming to the end of this tube of glue here. Now it's starting to burn my nose. Mildly unpleasant. I'm in the button making gulag here. Fingers are getting very crusty. Will he make it? Will he glue himself to himself? Stay tuned to find out next time. Alright, I think that's the last one. Yeah, maybe I could squeeze out a little more. Let's see. Okay, so there was 100 green buttons, and there were 100 buttons in this batch. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. So 88, 188 buttons per tube of glue, we have found out. I have more than enough glue on my table to do all of these buttons. However, the post office is now open and I gotta go send a wholesale order across the country. Tune in next time. We'll be gluing more red, blue, and yellow buttons. Thanks everybody for watching. Hope to talk to some of you soon.